Learning to operate machinery can open a lot of doors. I'll show you one that it opened for me. I hope you're all doing well this morning. I've got a terrible cold, so bear with me. Okay. Being able to run a milling machine and a lathe opened this door for me. Did you see who signed that? Pretty cool. Well, anyway, that was not now, because they make things differently. And back then, like 1981, it took a machine shop, at least a milling machine and a lathe to properly service those engines. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. Now, the cool thing about machine work is that you can take it in many, many directions and even get deeper into machine work, such as the tool and cutter grinder. Well, anyway, back to those motorcycles. I'm going to show a picture of two guys. I've showed it before on some of my videos. And here it is, and then I'll come back and explain it. Isn't that interesting? Well, the old guy, that's the classic old guy, would do nothing to help the young guy. Now that old guy, he is a World War II veteran in the motor pool. And he got in the motor pool because in something like 1939, he went to the Harley factory school and got that certificate. But he would not, he took to the grave everything he knew. Okay, I'll be back. All right. Now, these are special Harley Davidson tools, and they were made by the Kent Moore Company, and they were extremely expensive for the times, too. I can tell you, this is the rod lap here. That was $750. But like this set here is from the 1930s. This here, with its attachments in 1970s, was over $1,500. You could almost buy a motorcycle for that. Now, this here is a rod vise. You can slip that, pull the cylinder off and slip that in there and clamp the rod and change the rod bushing in the old days. This is a very interesting tool here, and I think you're going to get a kick out of it, but I have to go and explain a few things. Okay, I'll be back to do some of that. Okay, what the old guy knew how to do was to rebuild the 5-piece crankshaft. Now later on, and modern crankshafts are 3-piece. They make the flywheels here and the main shafts integral. Now here's another a little shorter one for a different year, main shaft. Now from 55 up, they used a Timken bearing on this end, on the main drive end, and a roller bearing on the pinion side here, the cam case side. Then there's roller bearings on this rods, and all these roller bearings, they had plain roller bearings on this side, 54 and earlier, come in oversize in 2 10,000th steps up to 1,000ths, and then generally there's a 2,000ths over repair roller. Well, anyway, you have to use those expensive tools to size these. Now that long tool is case lapping, and that's very critical. But I'll just talk about this right now. You can see how they keep the cylinders in line is a knife and fork rod. And this is the type of setup that's in the Rolls-Royce and Allison engines, 12 cylinders to keep them short. Their cylinders are in line with each other. And so they use a knife and fork rod like this. That's kind of a unique thing. Now, one of the most interesting puzzles about this thing is you got to put this stuff together. And and all these parts have these tapers. The crank pin, the main shaft, pinion shaft, all held in with nuts. All these tapers, and they're short tapers too. And when you put this thing together at the very end, it's got to run 2,000ths here, here. And that's not so easy, really. Now, you can't possibly, if you think about it, and that's the machinist end, no writing. It's thinking about how things actually work in interface with each other. So when you start putting this thing together, not all this stuff is in the manuals either. You're going to want these things to have centers here. You put the shafts and the flywheels here. Then you're going to want to put it between centers and make sure that these run out as least as possible. Now often, especially on older stuff and stuff from about 1974 to 1980, there can be a lot of really inaccuracies in all these, in some of the components here. So with your machinist skills, that gives you an edge on a situation like that. Now I'm throwing all the Harley nonsense out the window, the profiling around on choppers and stuff. I'm talking pure machine work here, mechanical work. Forget the whole thing about motorcycles. This is more serious. This is machine work. So, you put this thing all together and you tweak it and you bang it, and there's quite a process to it, and these have specific torques. And you got to be careful on older stuff. See, this is a forged steel flywheel. It's a performance kind of thing. So you can put more torque on these components to hold it together, when you get increase in horsepower. So let's say you get this thing running true a thousandths and a half on that. You go, man, that's really good. But what you can't check is that crank pin. You see that? How do you measure that? How do you know if that crank pin's straight? Well, it likely isn't. Now this is pretty cool. I'll set the camera up on a tripod. I forget to rotate that microphone. I hope you can hear me. My voice is pretty weak anyway, but I got a cold. Okay, I'll be back. It actually shows this in the old manuals because it's absolutely critical for the life of the engine. And I want to point out that the average life of a big twin Harley Davidson engine was about 35,000 miles. The Sportsters, the XL models, was 15 to 20. That's before it starts smoking or clanking or something. I thought you might find that interesting, and I think most people would find today that unacceptable. Because when the Evos came out, they started getting up to a good 50,000 miles on the engine, and probably new ones are doing even better. Okay, let's have a look at this. I think you'll find it really interesting, because I did. So we kind of got some technology that's like steam engine, old piston radial aircraft engines. And what these Harley Davidsons are like 2 cylinders out of a radial engine. But my dad was an expert on those things, and I'll have to get into some of that stuff. And he liked to ride these motorcycles until he crashed one during the war. Those old 45 military machines. So back to the problems. So you can use your machinist skills to make this stuff work. You tap things over with a lead hammer, and if you can't get these things settled in, you can take a bearing scraper and settle them in, because you know how to use a tool like that. Motorcycle mechanics wouldn't. So this is the fun part. So you get this all trued up, but there's no way to measure that crank pin. And as you're truing this stuff up, you're smacking the airs around and putting it right here, right at that crank pin. When you're truing these shafts up and getting them true, you're actually starting to deform the metal in the flywheels and stuff. And that crank pin can do all kinds of things, and be like that and be like that. And what that does is give you something a little worse than a bent rod. It's like a twisted rod and bent. They can be both twisted and bent, the connecting rods. I can talk, get a little bit too much in detail, but this is a more modern version. These are aftermarket performance flywheels. These rods are later Harley Davidson Evo rods. They're forged 4140. The older rods were made out of malleable cast. Okay, so what do? You're going to have a piston that's twisted and bent in the cylinder, the squaring plate. So to make that work, I think I'll do it on this rod. You rotate the crankshaft at 90 degrees, that crank pin. See, 90. If I can get it back over to 90, yeah, 90. Okay, and the crankshaft's in the crankcases. This last thing you do before you put them cylinders on. So the crankcases will lift it up about there. So you put that in there. I'll get it at 90 again. You slip that in there. And then you put a square bottom piston. It's better to use a piston, or you can put a pin through there, but a piston's better with a square bottom. And you roll it that way, and you put strips of paper, thin paper, and then you roll it this way. Now, if the rod is bent, for example, this way, the paper will slip out at that position, and it will slip out at this position. Now, if the rod's twisted, let me grab that. If the rod's twisted, when you have it in that position, the paper will slip out here. You rotate it over, then the paper slips out on the other side. And how do you fix that? You stick a bar through here and twist it and bend it until, with the piston and the scoring plate, the paper strips are held firmly there and there. It must be done. Well, I thought I'd give a little intro to it and talk about the old guys taking secrets to the grave. Now, I want to point out, as a shop hand, a machinist, a guy in the shop, I've built more than 1,000 of these. I'm not the engine expert and tell you what cam to use and stuff like that. I'm going to tell you to leave the thing alone and leave it stock. But that's what I did at one time. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back. Well, back in 1981, when I went to the Harley Davidson Factory School, to get there, I had to work 2 years in the dealership and then be okayed by the factory regional rep. I'll get into some Harley school stories and the culture of things a little bit maybe sometime. But the one thing I want to point out too is that when I went to that factory school and got involved in that, I was a machinist before that. In fact, I was working on the whoops nuclear projects that didn't produce any nuclear projects, but was a colossal waste of money and an incredible learning experience for me, because I went from working on farm equipment, logging equipment, mining equipment, to nuclear stuff. All kinds of alloys and stuff. Okay, I'll be back.